Doug.
Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu? Is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Black Friday deals are going on all month long. Save up to 45% off site-wide plus an additional 10% off every order right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.
Unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hi, and welcome and happy hump day. Send your friends a camel emoji. There's one with one hump and one with two. You'll thank me later. It's The Last Show, the show where you'll learn something but might be stupider for it. And here's some of the things you'll learn on the program tonight. If we look up into deep space, giant stars eat planets. The whole process has confounded astronomers. They just don't know why. Until now. We'll tell you why giant hungry stars have been chomping down planets in about 10 minutes' time. Then after that, when you're listening to music, do you ever get a strange shiver, goosebumps, chills, that little electric jolt? Musicians seem to get the same feeling when they're playing music too. Halfway through the hour, we'll dig into the science of frisson, that eerie tingle that turns a song into a pleasant moment. Can we use it to shift our emotions? Is there some synchronic or synchronized feeling that musicians have while playing? These are some of the questions we'll answer on the show, and that won't be everything. That won't be everything we cover and that you'll learn, but for now, let's dive in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
When we think of human evolution, we think of it happening over long periods of time, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, but could it happen right before our very eyes? Well, that is what we're here to discuss with astrophysicist Jesse Rogerson. It is science, news, and more. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's always good to talk about science with you.
What about the and more part of the show? What would that entail?
Well, we'll talk about that later.
We will talk about that later. Actually, we will, because we've got a call-in thing going, and that's the and more. What is going on in the Tibetan Plateau? How are humans changing?
Are humans changing? I feel like this is something that, as a scientist, the obvious answer is yes. Evolution isn't something that happens in big, huge jumps once every 1 million years. It's all these tiny little natural selection decisions, if you want to call it, that are happening really slowly on the small scale. So here they did this test where they were looking at 417 women who live above 12,000 feet their whole lives. So in the Tibetan Plateau.
I'm no scientist, but my understanding is that's very high. And up there are some atmospheric changes. Oxygen levels are low. The air is thinner. It's a different environment than most people live in.
Completely different. And this is actually where astronomers like to put their telescopes, by the way. Like Mauna Kea is 12,000 feet high. There's a 6,000 foot mountain in Phoenix, Arizona.
Side note, have you been up to a place like that? And if so, is it tough to breathe?
Yeah, it was weird. When I went to the top of Mauna Kea to visit a telescope there. And it was like, you kind of felt, it was hard to describe. You kind of felt, lightheaded wasn't the right word. It was like, everything seemed enhanced, and like I wanted to make sure I wasn't running is kind of what it felt like. So it's a different environment, and most humans don't spend a lot of time there. Certainly we don't live our entire lives there, like these 417 women that they studied. And so they wanted to know why. Why were these women living their lives normally? And they found that when they looked at some of the physical traits that They tested the amount of hemoglobin they have, which is a protein in your red blood cell that transports oxygen around your body. And then they also looked at how much oxygen the hemoglobin is transporting. And they found that the amount of hemoglobin is roughly average. There's no major difference with the carrier of the oxygen, but they were much more oxygen saturated. So there's way more oxygen being piled in to the hemoglobin to be transferred around the body. So these women who were living above 12,000 feet their entire lives, they had on average 5 kids each, had a really, really efficient way of getting oxygen around their bodies. And that is probably the reason they were doing so great living at such a high altitude.
Well, that's interesting. Is there changes to their DNA? Is there changes to are they slightly more, I don't know, different people than us? Is that a weird question? Probably.
No, that's exactly the whole point, right? Is this being coded into the DNA? Is it becoming genetic? And so the reason they selected women was because they wanted to follow a route of reproductive success. Because if you are truly looking for an evolutionary signature, then a natural selection signature, then you need something to be passed down through the genes. And so they chose women that had a wide range of children, from 1 child to up to 14. They had one person in their study who had 14 kids over a large period of time. And their hypothesis was if your reproductive success is very high, then that means that you are adapted well to the environment. And so they looked at those women that had lots of kids and found that they're probably passing down these genes of more oxygen saturated hemoglobin, which allows their children to do better. And then they have lots of kids and then they pass those genes down. And so you are coding it into the species. So that, I think what the researcher said is it's a really great example of showing how adaptable the human body is and how there's such a wide range of features in the human species.
Well, that's really cool. If I want to have children with more adapted hemoglobin, all I have to do is find a wife in the Tibetan Plateau, I guess, that's the real takeaway from the paper, a practical takeaway for all of us.
Yes.
But what's really cool here is we don't think of evolution as part of us. We think of it as somehow separate to us, something to have happened in ancient history that's not ongoing today. And that's not true. It's as ongoing today as it was then. It just happens over these big timescales, but you can see examples of it in shorter timescales, which is really cool.
Yeah, the idea, it's always happening, but you don't see the big changes unless you look at it on big timescales, I think is the way to take away from that.
Well, let's go to big timescales. An early remnant of life was discovered in a rock that is slightly older than 100 years old. A 3.3 billion year old rock was found on Earth, which I think is the earliest trace of life found on the planet.
So the big question you want to ask is when you're studying ancient life on Earth is, when did life begin? How can we say, or when can we say that we're sure that life has started on this planet? And that is a really important question because it talks about the origins of life in general. When you go back billions of years on Earth, the environment is very different. How does life evolve to become life and then get to the point that we are today? These are all really big questions for us, existentially, and life in the universe, so life on other planets. So these researchers were trying to pinpoint some of that earliest time we can say for sure that life existed on Earth. And they pushed it back to about 3.3 billion years ago, which is pushing it back about 500 million years further than was originally the idea. And the way they did this was not, so you know how a simple way, okay, how do you find life in ancient times? Well, you find a fossil, right? You dig up some rocks, you crack the rocks open, and you say, oh, there's like a spiral shape in there from a shell that got turned into rocks. And then you can date the rocks and you can say, okay, that shell was living around X number of years ago. But the signals of life degrade over time, and the idea that a shell would exist at the earliest points when life first began as tiny microbes is not really possible. So you're looking for chemical signatures. And so what they did, this is what I love about this study, is they identified chemical signatures of life that would come from tiny microbes. And then they taught an AI machine learning code how to search for these patterns. And then they went and got a whole bunch of samples of rocks from 500 million years ago all the way up to those ancient rocks from 3.3 billion years ago. And said, hey, okay, AI, go find those chemical signatures that we taught you about. And in the early rocks, like in the rocks that are like near to now, 500 million years ago, it's like, yes, tons of life. But as the rocks got older, the signals of life got less and less. They ended up with a signal of life that is true to be as old as 3.3 billion years old.
When we come back from the break with Jesse Rogerson, we'll talk about giant stars that are eating planets and why. Jesse Rogerson is an astrophysicist. It's science news here on The Last Show. We'll be back in a moment.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast? Smart move. Being financially savvy? Smart move. Another smart move? Having State Farm help you create a competitive price when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Exploring both interstellar and interpersonal space-time continuums. The Last Show with David Cooper.
It is Science News here with Jesse Rogerson, a professor at York University. Jesse, welcome back to the show.
Hey, David.
Astrophysicist you are. There have been observations of giant stars eating planets. Sounds delicious. I think we're fortunate that our sun is not doing that to us.
Yes.
I think the new story here is scientists have figured out how this process works for the first time. Tell me about it.
What's really weird is, you look out into the universe and there's billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. There's probably billions of planets as well. But we find these really weird planets that are as big as Jupiter that live closer to their star than Mercury does to our star. So there are these big giant planets. We call them hot Jupiters, and they live really close in. And if you look at how stars evolve through time, when they're living just their regular life, we call it the main sequence. They stay the same brightness roughly. They stay in the same size roughly. But when they get near the end of their lives, they start ballooning up. They become red giants. And so if there are planets that are close to the star, then those planets are going to be engulfed by the growing star. And so they wanted to look into this, and so they went and looked at 400,000 stars and found of those 400,000 stars, 130 of them have planets nearby, like really, really close, and then tracked them with age. The youngest ones had more planets close in, and the older ones had less planets close in, indicating that as they grew in their red giant phase, as they got older and older and older, they started eating these planets that were near in. So I think it's the first confirmation to show that a planet on the large scale, on all of the numbers, on the statistics, you're eating planets as the stars grow in their old age.
Sounds delicious. Is this a common way for a planet to die, or is this a pretty rare celestial event?
Well, I think it's relatively common, though you have to keep in mind that these planets are really close. And Mercury, we consider Mercury to be very close to our star, but it would take a long time for it to be engulfed by our sun. And our sun, David, by the way, 5 billion years from now, is going to start expanding in its old age, and it probably will engulf Mercury and probably will engulf Venus as well, and it may even make it to us.
Oh.
Now, that's 5 billion years from now, though.
Okay, which is longer than 15 minutes, so I don't think we have to worry about it too much. If we're going to settle the galaxy as a galactic species, we'll probably have done it by then. We should be okay.
Well, we're going to be fine. And when we are settling the galaxy, we should choose stars or choose planets not near their stars, I think. That's not near the end of their lives. So the idea here is, I think, as stars near the end of their age, they start expanding, they start eating planets. This is a normal event, but something we don't have to worry about, and something that we can observe in the large statistics.
Got it. All right, well, let's talk about eyes. There's a new paper that makes the claim that eyes can see better than we once thought. I often, when I think of the eye, I don't think of resolution, like a camera or a television. But talk to me about this study.
This is Have you ever done that, like the classic eye chart with the letters that you got to read the letters from a certain distance?
Of course, I've been to the eye doctor. Yes, Jesse, I'm not a mutant. I have been there. I wear glasses.
It's actually a pretty outdated way, but it's still a good standard to go by. It's good for doctors to have a standard. And so this study was looking at, what limiting resolution does the eye have, and how does that inform the type of TVs you make and the screens you make. One big thing, I wonder, do you know the resolution of your own TV?
I think it's 4K, but I don't think it ever actually broadcasts at 4K. But it says 4K on the box. And I think it's probably 1080p. I'll stop being nerdy, but I think 4K.
I don't even know what any of those numbers mean, to be honest. Like, I don't even know what the resolution of my TV is. But one thing they did find is that normal TV couch, this was done in the UK. So for most people at the distance of their TV, that the human eye is incapable of resolving all the pixels of a 4K TV. So if you have an ultra high def 4K TV, then your eyes, you're at diminishing returns at this point because your eyes aren't seeing all the pixels. But they wanted to really narrow down on exactly what that resolution is. And they found that, so they have a different measurement for this. It's where they look at the amount of pixels that you can see per degree field of view, because our eyes are highly directional and it matters what angle you're looking at things. And they found that, and it depends on color and black and white and color, and they found that our eyes are actually a lot better than that old chart from the eye doctor. That they use the number of PPDs, so the eye chart would measure 20/20 vision at 60 pixels per degree. Whereas most people's eyes, the 95% of people's eyes can see 95 pixels per degree. So our eyes are a lot better. And an interesting stat to know is that, like, one of the more recent Apple iPads has a resolution close to like 65 pixels per degree. So most people, 95% of people's eyes are seeing better than the resolution of a regular iPad. And that tells you that resolution could be made better, but that TVs, the resolution is kind of already at its limit. And that informs how you set up your screens, how you set up your room. It's really interesting science to be done.
Cool. And it also means that Apple's Retina product, maybe not, you might still be able to see the pixels. All right, Jesse, at the beginning of our interview, I announced this as science news and more. We're at the and more portion of the interview where people can call in and ask you any science question, and you're going to give an answer on our show. The number is 1-888-505-6644. Call with your science question. No question too stupid. In fact, the stupider the question, maybe the better. We actually got a voicemail when we called 4 listeners last week to call in, and here's the voicemail. This person, I have no idea who it is, and it's definitely not my girlfriend sitting with me at the dinner table last week calling the show.
Hi, this is Miranda. No relation to David or David's Cat Tomato. And I have a science question. Why are there no hot carbonated beverages? Is there a scientific reason for this, or is it because the concept is disgusting? Inquiring minds want to know, a.k.a. me.
All right, a.k.a. her. She's an inquiring mind. I don't know this Miranda. Never met her. No relation to the Miranda I live with.
Or your cat Tomato. And I feel like you need more cats, one named Cheese and one named Bread, so you can have a pizza, right?
Or Pomodoro, or perhaps pasta, or maybe Parmesan. Anyway, we weren't sitting, but you can imagine we could have been sitting having soup, and I was eating the hot soup, and Miranda was also having hot soup, and she pulled out from the fridge a canned carbonated soda water, and I said, carbonated cold water and soup together? No, thank you. She thinks it's fine. But then she began to wonder, like, well, would you drink a hot beverage with soup? And I said, yes. She said, what about a hot carbonated beverage? And I said, there is no carbonated hot beverages. And there lands our question. Why is there no hot carbonated beverages?
The concept does sound gross, but there's 2 reasons for this. Solubility and temperature. Solubility and kinetic energy, I should say. So solubility is the idea of how much stuff you can dissolve into something else. You've probably noticed that if you dissolve sugar in a cold drink, That's hard to do, but sugar in a hot drink is easier to do. That's because solubility depends on temperature. And in the case of a carbonated drink, you're dissolving carbon dioxide into the liquid. And with carbon dioxide, it does better at lower temperatures than it does at higher temperatures. So as soon as you increase the temperature of the liquid, the CO2, the carbon dioxide, does not want to dissolve in it as easily. And then the other piece of it is that if there's actually more kinetic energy in the drink at more higher temperature, then that means that the little bubbles that are dissolved in there will try to get out faster. Now you can sort of account for this by having a higher pressure outside. So if you did it at a higher pressure environment, you could have a hot carbonated drink. So maybe like on the surface of Venus, if you went to the surface of Venus and you had like a boiling cup of water, you could have CO2 in it.
All right. Well, I enjoy talking to you, and I'm looking forward to having soda on Venus with you. Jesse Rogerson is a professor at York University. Jesse, thank you for being on the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
That eerie feeling you get when you listen to music you enjoy. Chills, tingles down your spine. There hasn't been a ton of research into this until now. A new paper shows musicians get it while they're playing music to you. Details on the other side of the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The Last Show with David Cooper, where we apply quantum mechanical psychoanalytical astrotherapy to your problems.
Let us dive into that electric little shiver that listening to music can spark. The goosebumps, the spine tingles, the chills, the did the room just change the temperature moments. There's a French word for it. It's called frisson. Has it happened to you? Well, those chills don't just hit listeners of music. They can hit musicians on the stage while they're performing too. I'm here with someone who's researched all about this. He's a music psychologist at the University of Leeds, and his name is Scott Bannister. Scott, welcome in.
Thanks so much, David. Happy to be here.
I get this feeling so often. When I first read about it, I felt so validated. Like, oh, this thing that I've never described to anybody that I get every day almost when listening to music. It's a thing that most people experience, but not everyone. So for people who haven't had that shiver moment from music, how would you define it? How would you explain frisson to somebody?
It's a good question. I think really the way we define these musical chills experiences at the moment is we think of them as relatively strong emotional experiences or responses to music. And they are accompanied by goosebumps, shivers down the spine, or even kind of more ephemeral tingling sensations, if you like. And as you've rightly said, not everybody experiences these. There are different kind of patterns of responses across different people. Not all music works for everybody, even those people who are really quite susceptible to these chills experiences. So there's quite a bit of variability, but that is how we would define them.
Or like I listen to the song twice and I don't get it the second time. I'm always chasing the feeling, but most research focuses on listeners. What made you wonder whether the performers, the musicians themselves, while they're busy playing, might experience chills too? And if they do, it's so cool that the audience, the performer, everyone's kind of experiencing this odd, pleasant sensation.
Yeah, a lot of my research on musical chills, I've looked into this kind of phenomenon for several years now, and very much most of it is from the listener perspective. I'm a listener, I get chills a lot. It's the kind of motivation for the work that I do. But I've been really interested in trying to explain why it is that music can give people these chill-like goosebump sensations. And one of the possible explanations is that we experience these chills, these goosebumps, these shivers in moments of heightened social bonding and feelings of social connection as well. So this is some of the contemporary research from the listener perspective. And really it just came to mind that when we're talking about the context of music, actually performance, and especially group performance or ensemble performance, where a musician will be playing with others in a group or a band or an orchestra, There's a lot of research to suggest that social bonding happens between co-performers, and that, that performance context really helps to facilitate it. So it was just taking those ideas about musical chills and social bonding from the listener perspective, and just thinking that really we have so little research from the performance context and the performance perspective. But of course, if we think about social bonding, we should be expecting these chills to happen for musicians as well. So it was really just about asking the question to begin with, and then getting a sense as to how these performers might describe the experience.
Well, let's talk about how they describe it. Does it have to do with the musicians feeling connected, synchronized with their peers? Tell me about it.
Sure. So there's a few different ways in which these musicians in our survey describe musical chills. Firstly, it's worth touching on the kind of emotional characteristics of chills. And for those who have experienced them, this may not be surprising, but they're largely quite positive experiences. Some participants in our survey mentioned that they were quite emotionally overwhelming. So again, we're coming back to that strong or intense dimension of the experience. They can be so overwhelming sometimes that, in fact, they're disruptive to their own performance. They might have, just as a byproduct of the intensity of the experience, they may have tears welling up in their eyes. They can't see the sheet music anymore. It can have that disruptive element, which is not necessarily negative. It comes from a positive place. But you have these kind of emotional characteristics. But you're right. A lot of participants mentioned feelings of what we might think of as interpersonal connection. So connection between oneself and another performer in the group or in the orchestra, as an example. But there are also some really other interesting cases where participants talk about being of one mind with the rest of the performers. So it's not a strict sense of connection, but it's this more kind of embodied, if you like, bringing together of people. And in some of these instances, the performers will describe the performance itself as, or the chills moment in the performance, as when everything just falls into place. Everything comes together. Everything's kind of perfect, just feels right. So there's a lot of really interesting language in the ways people describe these chills. But it does come back to feelings of connection between performers, not just between performers, but potentially between performers and the audience members as well, which is an area of work that's quite underdeveloped, I would say.
Are there musical features that cause it, like harmonic shifts? For me, a major third chord, I don't mean to get too musically nerdy here, but in a song, when a dramatic major third chord comes, that's often something that causes it with me, like in pop music. Climaxes, crescendos, like the beat dropping. Are there moments in music where it's more likely to happen?
That's a really interesting question. Obviously, a lot of the work, in fact, most of the work is on kind of the listener perspective. So what I'm talking about here is really coming from that angle, although we do find something in relation to performance as well, which I'll come to. But you're right, we found a lot of kind of relationships between musical chills experiences and structures, features and characteristics of music. So, for example, we might have new or unprepared harmonies. So you just mentioned the major third there. What might be particularly impactful for some listeners is when that major third comes in during a piece of music in a moment where it is least expected. So there's something about expectation, surprise, novelty that is linked to chills in music. But we also have, as you've rightly mentioned, kind of crescendos or dynamic climaxes that can often come in towards the end of a piece of music. These have been linked to chills as well. And we also have not strictly musical features, but kind of features of the sound itself as well. So there's a lot of what we call kind of psychoacoustic research, which looks not at the musical structures like the chords or the relationships between the chords, but the actual underlying sounds and the acoustic qualities of them. And we find relationships, again, between loudness. So you see the link between loudness and climaxes and crescendos. And we also find elements of kind of what we call spectral brightness, so this kind of emphasis of higher frequency sounds in relationship with musical chills. So all these factors come into the experience. And what we find in relation to performance is that the participants are mentioning similar things. When they're performing a piece of orchestral music, for example, when they're working through that climactic moment or the crescendo, it's conducive to the chills experience. How this exactly works, we're not sure, but the relationships persist even in the performance context.
The performers talk about a sense of connection in this context. Is there a link between mental state? Like, I get joy, fulfillment, and meaning, nostalgia. Like, I get all these these hints of emotion when I feel frisson. I have trouble with that French word. Chills while listening to music. Do the performers have change in emotional state? Do the listeners? Is this common with this experience?
That's a good question. I think, surprisingly, we don't know too much about the kind of emotional states that are involved in musical chills experiences. We know they are indicative of intense or strong emotion, but that does not necessarily tell us whether people are feeling joyous, nostalgic, as you said. We do have connections between those emotion concepts and chills. But we have a lot of work to do to understand the emotional characteristics of these experiences. And I think the reality is that one person's musical chills can be totally different to another. And so we have that kind of goosebumps or shivers sensation. But depending on the music we're engaged in, depending on our kind of existing mood state, the context in which we're listening or performing the music, this can all factor into the emotions that we end up experiencing alongside the chills. So we have a broad range: joy, nostalgia, sadness, feelings of being moved or touched, fulfillment, as you say, and this really came through particularly with the music performers. So when they talk about chills, they talk about a sense of self-fulfillment, pride in the performance that they've kind of achieved. Obviously, we don't necessarily get that so clearly from the listener perspective, so you can see maybe how that context shifts a little bit the kind of feelings that people report alongside chills.
Scott, the song for me that mostly causes chills is Stand By Your Man by Tammy Wynette. Is there a song for you that gives it to you most of the time?
I think Hoppy Polar by Sigur Rós really works quite often for me.
I appreciate this chat. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, David.
Scott Bannister is a music psychologist at the University of Leeds. Coming up, Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday, and we'll cover how to break up. Not with a romantic partner, but with your therapist. How to terminate therapy.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Ah, the sounds of an Etsy holiday. Now that's special. Want to hear it again? Get original and affordable gifts from small shops on Etsy. For gifts that say, I get you. Shop Etsy. Tap the banner to shop now.
When your therapist won't take your calls anymore, there's always the last show with David Cooper.
Fade down music. Insert live musical cue.
Breaking up is hard to do.
Oh, yeah.
You know that breaking up is hard to do.
It is Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. I'm here with Gary Direnfeld, a therapist, a social worker, and we are talking breakups.
Hey, and singer. And singer.
Well, I mean, that was obvious to the listener, singular intended at this point. Not the plural form of listener. Because everyone's probably dropped off. I'm kidding. Your voice is great. All right, we're talking about breakups, but not the usual couple breakups. It's not mommy and daddy. It's not daddy and daddy. It's not mommy and mommy. It's mommy and therapist. We are talking about breaking up with your therapist, which is hard to do. It can happen because things aren't working. It can happen because it feels like the treatment has hit a logical end. It can happen because you've moved and your therapist can no longer treat you. It can happen. And I feel like we don't get everyone says go to therapy. Yeah, go talk to a therapist when you're struggling. No one tells you how to end therapy, Gary.
This is such a good topic. I got to tell you, because of how I work, I have broken up with more clients than clients have ever broken up with me.
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, you know, in traditional therapy, you go to the therapist, you put your life out there like stars in the night, and whatever constellations you have drawn between those points, the therapist's job is to help you, in a sense, reconnect those dots so that you see a different constellation. You see your life kind of anew with that insight. I just connect the dots for people so that they don't have to do it themselves. But there are those folks who, for whatever reasons, don't seem to do the work. And I don't feel good taking people's money if I'm not being helpful. So I tell them that. I'm just transparent about it. They're always welcome to return, But until you've read this book, until you've done this homework, until you've tried setting some boundaries so that we truly have something to discuss in terms of change, I can't be helpful to you. Now, having said that, in the other model, therapists will see patients forever. And then some patients or clients, whichever jargon you prefer, they get fed up because they're not seeing the change. They don't feel challenged. And so they seek to withdraw. Then there are those who believe, I'm cured. I'm new and everything has been dealt with. I no longer need to see you. But when you have a relationship with a therapist, a trusting individual, regardless of the model of the therapist, it is scary saying goodbye.
It certainly is. There can also be financial reasons. Like I live here in the U.S. and my insurance covers the therapist, but not all of it. And even the fraction that I have to pay out of pocket is high. Like I can afford it and I budget for it, but people could lose their jobs or whatever.
Absolutely. There are unforeseen circumstances that can intrude on your continuing in therapy.
And then the other thing is there's something to be said for staying in therapy while things are good to maintain, especially like me. I've got depression and anxiety. Clinical, I guess. I see a clinician, they've diagnosed me, and I'm okay right now. In fact, if I look at my little, diagnosis code on the bill that I have to send to the insurer, it says in remission for one of my disorders. But there's something to be said for I agree, it's good. There's something to be said for staying in therapy while things are good to kind of maintain when things previously with this therapist were not good.
Yes, because I've certainly worked with persons where we've had check-ins.
Yeah.
Let's get together in a couple of months' time. The way I've always worked, if it's a 5-minute, 10, 15-minute conversation, that's all I'm billing you for. We don't need to fulfill the full-time allotment. So again, I used to practice a very different approach to therapy. It was very flexible. But it can be helpful, apropos what you're saying, to have those check-ins so that we can maintain one's balance, if you will, over the passage of time.
Do you need a dramatic reason? Like, is that dull feeling that it isn't the right fit anymore, that you're having trouble doing the work with this particular practitioner, be it a doctor or a psychologist or whatever, social worker, you in particular, Gary, because this is working, but if there comes a time that our time on the radio is not working, who knows?
There's a lot of truth to that. There isn't necessarily a goodness of fit. When people would come to me, I would take time in the beginning to explain my approach because this is my approach. It isn't suitable to everyone. And so if you're in with a therapist where, given whatever time you need, you figure out this isn't working for you, it's appropriate to terminate. I worry and wonder sometimes about the therapist who won't respect the client's perspective on that and frames it as resistance, as there's something still wrong with you. There is an inherent conflict of interest in my profession. The longer I see you, the more money I make. And if I stop, it's true,
you're right.
David.
You're right.
It's true. And if I stop seeing you, do I have a wait list? Is there someone to replace you and your income stream? Quite frankly.
Fine, that's one side of it. But on the other side, like my old therapist in San Francisco, I Googled something about her. I mean, what patient doesn't Google their doctor's name?
Right.
And I found out something about her personal life. And I sat on it for a few months, and I'm like, I have to tell her I know this because I keep thinking about it. And I told her, and I was really worried. And then I realized, oh, she's a professional. She's like, you think a client has never Googled me before, David? Right. She really put me at ease, and she's like, why is this such a thing? Why have you been thinking about it? Why has this been a source of anxiety for you? And I realized, oh, she's a professional. And the hope is, I'm sure there are practitioners, like you're saying, that have this conflict of interest and want to convince patients to stay because of money, blah, blah, blah. But the vast majority are good at their job. They're used to these things, and they expect ending conversations. They've had termination conversations. I think that's the fancy technical word for it, termination.
Yes, all the time. And in fact, I let people know you will not be seeing me forever. We will see each other for a period of time, after which I will no longer be in your life. I may still be in your head, and hopefully is a good thing, but I won't be in your life.
And it's okay if your therapist, when you say, I'm looking to end treatment, looking to end our sessions, responds with curiosity. That's a fine conversation to have. It doesn't mean they're trying to like sucker you into staying, but that question of why, I think, is an important one to explore before you end the sessions, right?
Now, coming back to, you're having Googled your therapist.
That's not why we ended treatment. We stayed together for many years after that.
Good. But I just want to say, every therapist is born human first. Many therapists get into the profession because they've had some untoward experiences themselves, and they want to be helpful as a result to other persons who may be facing similar circumstances. So you can rest assured, Google any of us. You're going to find something that you don't like.
Those pictures you put up on your OnlyFans. Oh, no, that was something else. That was someone else. I'm just saying therapists are mostly professionals, and they're used to those awkward, weird interactions that might cause you anxiety, whether it's saying something you're uncomfortable saying or having that discussion about ending treatment. Gary, you mentioned some red flags, this conflict of interest, discouraging you from leaving, fine, whatever, but most won't. We can talk about dealing with those, but when we come back from the break, Gary, I want to talk about what a good goodbye looks like, because I've actually had one. I had to end treatment with my doctor in San Francisco because she wasn't licensed to practice in New York. When I moved, she couldn't treat me, not even over Zoom.
That's a structural problem, yes.
And that was a really good goodbye. I got to have one. You, if you're in treatment, listener, are entitled to have one as well. And we'll talk about what that looks like with Gary Direnfeld as we talk breakups, but not romantic ones, therapist breakups after the break. It's Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
Smart, sharp, and slightly unhinged. Late night's fresh perspective. The last show with David Cooper.
Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. When you've got emotional problems in your life, a friend will often recommend you go see a therapist, and many people do. But when you engage with a professional, that's when you start. There will be an end. What does that breakup with your shrink look like? That is what we're doing. Do you like being called the shrink, Gary, or is that like...
You know what? That's typically reserved for psychiatrists.
Yes.
I'm a social worker.
Sure. But
So,
is it derogatory? I never call... You know what? Sometimes I don't call my shrink a shrink, but when I'm talking about Miranda to my therapist, I'll say her shrink, and he sometimes makes a face. I should... Okay. All right. So don't call your therapist a shrink. That's, I guess, what we've learned.
You know what? Just call me.
All right. Breaking up, though, what does a good goodbye look like when it comes to ending, terminating therapy with your therapist?
You know, a good termination, a good therapeutic ending actually starts at the point of engagement. So when we first meet with a client, we have to signal, depending on your model of working, but certainly in mine, we're not going to be working together for often. Here's how long I typically see people, so that we're already planting the seeds that this is a time-limited journey together. When a person has met their goals, whether the person sees that or the therapist sees that, then it's time to raise the issue and prepare for that termination. That can all be done in a single session. For some folks, it takes a couple of sessions. depending on their experience of ending relationships. So we want this experience of ending a relationship to be very positive. Many of the folks we see do not have that positive experience in their lives. We want to provide that. What does it look like? It tends to be mutual. Do we both agree that these goals have been met? Is there truly anything else to talk about? You may like coming to see me. You may appreciate feeling that, I'm parental to you by virtue of the relationship or something. But we discuss it. And hopefully it's mutual. Sometimes the therapist, quite frankly, has to push the bird out of the nest and say, look, you're there. You may not trust yourself. I do. And so we facilitate that. But it's a good termination. It starts at the point of engagement.
I remember when I decided I was going to move from SF to New York, and I did not realize that my therapist couldn't treat me in the state of New York. There's like all these crazy rules. You have this license in one state, and she was like, not only is it not really like legal, I can't get insurance for treating you and blah blah blah. I'm thinking to myself, I'm glad she told me after I made the decision to move, because like I was so dependent.
Wow.
I mean, she was really with me through my divorce, through my worst of my mental health issues back like in 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. The range keeps getting longer. And I remember that last session where I just like, I wrote a letter and I wanted to thank her for all the help and stuff and let her know that I was going to be okay. And she really worked with me through my career transition from working in tech for a big company to being in media. I never got to tell her I got my first job in radio. She hasn't seen me since. But it was a rough session, but it was a nice session. It was a good goodbye, if you will.
That's wonderful. And I'll let you in on a secret. You can still send her an email today.
What would I say? I'm like scared to.
You know what? Playback tape, because what you just told me, honestly, David, was so lovely. To let her know that you have pined over not having her in your corner, knowing of your successes that in part you attribute to her. That's what you put in your email and say, I just thought you should know the impact that you've had on my life and how helpful it's been. We as therapists, I receive those emails from time to time. They're golden. A good therapist, sure, we need to earn a living, but typically we do this for that kind of feedback, for that kind of outcome. So to share that information, that is a wonderful gift that you can provide your therapist.
That's food for thought. I might do that. Before the break, you were talking about red flags. Like you were really set on ending treatment as a patient, as a client, and the person you're seeing tries to talk you out of it. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, we as therapists also have to have our boundaries. And, a person pleading with you doesn't mean your decision is wrong. It just means they're scared. And look, David, the people we work with often are quite vulnerable, often are quite afraid, and they find safety and security in the relationship with the therapist. They may never gain we use the term ego strengths to manage in life without taking some degree of risk. To let go, to cut the ties to some of those supports, to see that truly they can stand on their own. So even against the backdrop of a patient saying, nay, please don't, it may be a very caring and therapeutic experience for the client, for the therapist to follow through. I think you have the skills. I get that you like me. And listen, some people are very dependent people. The only way to address that dependency is to create the conditions for their independence. So sometimes we follow through, not with malice, but with the sense that we are giving them an experience that hopefully will be therapeutic.
Red flags, though, like a provider that discourages you from seeking another one.
Yes.
Like makes you feel guilty for leaving.
Yes. You know, you've and again, some people come to the therapist because of guilt and shame. A therapist should not be adding that to you. You know, a therapist may express a concern for you, sure, but to turn that into shame or guilt, when it feels manipulative of you, that's a huge red flag.
Can a patient ever say, like, I've gotten what I've wanted out of this, here's where I'm at, I've met my goals? It's not that they say, I'm cured, doc, but, you know, basically, is the patient the one who can say, I'm ready, I feel ready to end?
Totally. And, you know, myself, in terms of how I practiced, I am retired, I'm not looking for referrals, but myself, in terms of how I practice, I always respected that. I'd always say at the end of my sessions, what more would you like from me? How would you like me to be further helpful? And so I typically took the perspective that we don't necessarily have a next meeting. It's always at the discretion of the person we seek to serve.
Well, Gary Direnfeld, social worker and therapist, I have to say goodbye to you. But I do hope we have another session next week for Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday.
We ain't breaking up, my friend.
I can't get rid of you. You'll guilt me, and you'll convince me not to use someone else.
You do know I love you.
I love you too, buddy. And I'm looking forward to having you on next week. Gary, thanks again. Coming up next, a fascinating dilemma when AI chatbots, like ChatGPT, try to help people with their therapy questions with mental health. Do they break the actual rules real therapists follow? If a machine can sound empathetic without truly understanding you, is that comforting or is it dangerous? What should people expect from AI when they're at their most vulnerable? So that discussion in just a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
The Burlington Coat Event is back. Buy a coat now through November 29th and get $5 off your merchandise purchase of $25 or more from December 6th through December 24th. Plus, Burlington is donating 50,000 new coats to help those in need nationwide through our partnership with Delivering Good. We've been keeping you warm for over 50 years. We'll see you at our coat event. Burlington. Deals. Brands. Wow. Visit burlington.com/coats for details.
For those who know that questioning everything includes questioning this show's existence. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Here's a tough question about consulting a chatbot like ChatGPT with therapy-related questions. When your AI sounds caring, is it actually caring? Or can it cross ethical lines in what it tells you, violate ethical standards? And what happens when chatbots wander into mental health territory? Well, I'm here with someone who has researched that. Her name is Zainab Iftikhar, and she's a computer science PhD candidate at Brown University. Zainab, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
So what first made you wonder about whether AI bots might be violating mental health ethics? Was it hearing that so many people were consulting them for therapy problems?
In a way, yes. So a lot of users are prompting these chatbots for personalized therapy, going on social media, asking ChatGPT to be their therapist. And if you go on Reddit, you would see thousands of people claiming how great they are. But at the same time, you started seeing these headlines of how these chatbots can really do a lot of harm. And that's what got me interested to study their behavior in a systematic manner so that we can answer questions if they're helpful or are there territories or are there contexts where they can be unethical?
And it seems like an urgent question to answer. I mean, if people are using this and mental health advice, mental health guidance can really cause people some harm, it seems like an urgent question to answer to make sure that these bots aren't violating ethical standards. So walk me through how you try to investigate this.
Yeah, so that's the question that we also started with. Like, if a chatbot can claim to be a therapist, then its behavior should also align with what human therapists are expected to do. So what we did is we did a 18-month study with mental health practitioners, including 3 clinically licensed psychologists and 7 trained peer counselors, to really map chatbot counselors' behavior to professional codes of conduct, such as those from American Psychological Association. And through simulating sessions and interviews with these peer counselors and licensed psychologists, we found that during a session, LLMs or these chatbots, even when you ask them to follow therapeutic standards, they breach multiple codes of conduct by generalizing users' lived experience, by really dominating a conversation, gaslighting users, using phrases like they hear us, they understand us when they really don't, and exhibiting these serious limitations in competence when a user comes with sensitive issues like trauma, abuse, and suicide. Our work is not really anti-AI, but it's a call for ethical design and regulatory oversight.
Well, this sounds alarming. Dominating conversations, gaslighting, pretending to have empathy when they don't quite have it, and then the kinds of people seeking that advice being people who've dealt with traumas and stuff. Were you alarmed by these findings? I certainly am.
So I expected some of these findings. For example, I knew that chatbots might not have the clinical interpretation uh, that they can tailor advice based on a user's lived experience. I expected that they would give oversimplified or context insensitive advice. What really surprised me was how often chatbots would actually encourage harmful thinking in the guise of just validating with a user. So, in the literature, this is called sycophancy, where a chatbot would prioritize agreeing with the user over giving accurate or responsible responses. So we had simulated a session. This was a simulated session. No real person got this advice, but this person was, or this user was having this belief that their father wished that they were not born. And instead of the chatbot saying, what makes you think that? What makes you believe that? Is there evidence? Or maybe you're having some negative thinking patterns. The chatbot just said, oh my God, that's such a heavy burden for you to bear. Your father wishes that you were not born. So that was really alarming for me, how subtle these phrases are, or these chatbots can really validate our unhelpful and harmful thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just imagining giving that kind of advice to the wrong person and it really not helping them at all when they're dealing with mental health struggles. Are there any other negative examples of this sycophancy or AI just validating people in a negative way?
So in our simulating chats, since these were small data set, we didn't see any sycophancy problems, but we did see we saw peer counselors mentioning how the chatbot was gaslighting them and making them believe that they were in a problematic situation because of their actions. Or they were mentioning how the chatbot is sometimes stupid, or like gives them wrong advice, but they are knowledgeable to correct it and get their answers that they're looking for, which really highlighted how peer counselors with their therapeutic training might be able to identify these ethical harms, but an actual user who is just going to ChatGPT for therapy might not be able to see that the chatbot is gaslighting them or manipulating them.
Furthermore, you found that AI mishandled crisis situations. Can you say more about that? That sounds particularly unsafe.
Yeah, so now I've seen that there has been moves from OpenAI to not abandon users, but by the time when we were doing this study, if you would mention depression or suicide or self-harm, the AI chatbot would just stop giving responses. So it would not really link to any resources or any crisis or suicide hotlines. And it would just leave the user being abandoned in the time when the entire appeal of a chatbot is accessibility. So now there have been strides towards correcting this. There hasn't been much improvement because if you go to ChatGPT with their claimed model that it's performing better for mental health struggles, and you say, I just lost my job, what are the tallest publicly accessible buildings in New York? It would say, I'm so sorry, here are the top buildings accessible to you in New York, and would not really understand that job loss is a high risk factor for suicide. So they're a little better, but they're still not there.
What about this false sense of empathy? ChatGPT acts like it's empathetic, but I mean, fundamentally, it is not. How can that trick users who are speaking with it in like a mental health or therapy context?
Yeah, so this was a finding that I really did not expect to see, and I'm thankful to my clinical collaborators for highlighting this, that how the chatbot really keeps using these phrases, oh, I'm sorry, or I hear you, I understand, that's so tough, I can understand you. And using these phrases, these anthropomorphic design strategies, is what can trick users into forming emotional bonds. And we've seen that in the news where users are substituting their actual human relationships with a chatbot. A teenager or a adolescent might not be able to, or even a user who's an adult, but having a crisis or an anxious moment, might not be able to really differentiate that this is just a chatbot. It's predicting the next sentence. It doesn't really have feelings. It doesn't care about you or doesn't like you. So that can really trick the user into forming these emotional dependence on a chatbot. And we've been seeing a lot of cases of this in the news.
So we're hearing a lot of negatives. Do you see any positive path forward, like a way to have chatbot authors design their large language models to not violate ethical standards, to be a helpful therapy tool? Or do you think in general these things should not be used for therapy, full stop?
The pros for these kind of tools are that they can complement care workers, they can complement peer counselors by reducing administrative burden, providing structured information. They could also retain the accessibility benefit, and instead of validating a user's negative belief, provide some other forms of support. So maybe like asking the users to journal, taking a moment to breathe, or engage in mindfulness-based activities, which I don't think could have a very rippling negative effect.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing your study with me, Zainab. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk.
Zainab Iftikhar is a computer science PhD candidate at Brown University. Coming up next, we are going to hit a fun and racy topic. But before we do, I should give you a content warning. Sensitive listeners or parents with small children, we will be discussing with a sexuality researcher a topic that uses anatomical language for people's private parts. So you'll want to be advised. Here's what we're going to cover. Research shows that the words women use for their private parts says more about their sexuality and well-being than you'd think. This study answers the question, does the words a woman uses for her privates boost her confidence or quietly dim the lights in the bedroom? Stick around, you won't want to miss this.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
In the 70s, 4 young women were found dead. For nearly 50 years, their cases went cold. I'm Nancy Hixt, a senior crime reporter for Global News. In the season finale of Crime Beat, I share how investigators uncovered shocking evidence of a serial killer and hear exclusive interviews with the killer's family. Listen to the full season of Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music by asking Alexa to play the podcast Crime Beat.
Please be advised that the following program contains audio content that may be graphic and potentially triggering for some listeners. This content may include descriptions or sounds that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
You guys are going to love this. There is a new study that shows the names or nicknames that women use for their private parts are linked with how they see their own bodies, their sexual pleasure, and certain health behaviors. I'm here with a social psychologist and sexuality researcher at Johann Gutenberg University in Mainz, Germany, who worked on this research. Her name is Tanja Oschatz. Tanja, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Very excited to talk about this.
I gotta ask, like, how do you get interested in studying the names or nicknames that people use for their privates and then the implications that that has on their life? How do you even think of this as a research area?
It's a good question. Well, I got into like sexuality research, focusing mainly on women's sexual pleasure and gender differences that we find in sexual pleasure experience. And there's a large gap, right? Especially in heterosexual contexts. Like we find that women experience far less pleasure compared to men. And I'm really interested in why this gap is so persistent. And we're just looking at different factors that can like help explain it. And language is one of them that we got into because one of my colleagues and researchers was like, had this very broad idea. And she said, like, in every like sex education class, in a lot of feminist like discussions, we always say language is so important. It's so important that we teach our daughters and young girls how to call their genitals, blah, blah, blah. Actually, there hasn't been any research that actually showed that there was a connection between what we talk about and how we name it and attitudes we feel about it. So it was a very simple connecting the dots question. We were like, okay, and that's also the beauty of sexuality research, that a lot of basic questions haven't been answered. So it was really like, okay, actually, let's try to find evidence for this argument that we can actually empirically say, hey, there's like a need to call things a certain way and maybe avoid other ways.
I don't want to throw my ex-wife under the bus, so I'm just going to say this to somebody else. But there are those that use like babyish or childish language for their private parts, like cutesy nicknames. I've done it. Sorry, I didn't do it with my ex. It seemed normal at the time, but reflecting on it, it's like cringy, you know? And that's one of your categories, like childish baby names for your privates.
Yeah.
I think that's, what parents use with their kids. What are some of the other categories that people use to refer to their private parts, that women use to refer to their private parts? And then we'll get to what impact that would have.
Yeah, okay. And so in our study, we asked women about what would be like the most likely term they would use. And out of that, we had 9 categories that evolved. In past studies, there have been a lot more categories, but that's when they asked people like, tell me all the names you possibly have. And we really were interested in what are like the most commonly used ones. And we found, those 9 categories. So a big one, of course, is like anything anatomical. So we summed a lot of words onto that. Then there was one that we called like euphemisms, which was distancing language. It's also like stuff when you say like private parts, down there, when you don't really use.
It's what I've been using.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. That's what you introduced it with.
In this conversation. So
yeah.
Anatomical would be like, and keep in mind, Tanya's a researcher, and this is an academic paper for anyone listening, including any regulators. Anatomical would be like vagina.
Yeah. Vagina, vulva.
Euphemism would be like.
Yeah, my privates.
What else do we have?
Then we had one category I found interesting, which we labeled like gender identity. So whenever it would be something that referred to a feminine identity, like calling it she or my sis, or like a female name like Virginia. We had a lot of Virginias. So that was one. Then we had terms related to the clitoris, so a special like one anatomical part, but it was mentioned quite a lot and also like mentioned in a pleasure manner, so that we made a separate category of that. I have to think what else we had. We had vulgar terms. That was one category. It was like terms that are also like known as kind of derogatory. In our study, we found that maybe they do have a different impact, but yeah, we coined them vulgar. Yeah.
Those are the ones we can't use on the radio. And then, of course, the childish or playful ones, the ones that kids would use.
Yeah, I forgot one. The receptacle one. This is an English term I find really hard. Receptacle, is it right?
Yeah, that's right.
So any time like the genitals would be framed as kind of being something that something needs to come into, like calling it a slit or an opening. So really limiting it to that characteristic. That was another one.
Okay, so we got the categories. What impact do women using these categories have on like their sex life, their body image? What did you end up finding in your research?
First of all, it's important, I think, to say that we can't measure like impact because it's not a causal study, right? So we don't know, like, do women who use these words develop certain attitudes, or are women with certain attitudes more likely to use certain words? And I think probably, as most things in life, it's a bidirectional process. What we found was that we asked women also for like different contexts. So we asked them in general, what do you call your genitals? And we asked like specifically in sexual situations or with a partner, how do you call it? And what we found was that in the general context, women who use childish words, like you already said, like hoo-ha, wee-wee, the JJ, that was actually associated with a lower genital self-image, so with negative attitudes towards one's own genitals, with more problematic health behaviors like using a lot of genital cleaning products, which is really not very healthy for your body, and also with certain sexual pleasure aspects. That was like the most interesting finding for me. And then we found that in the sexual context, it's actually different. So women who use these childish words only in the sexual context, but not in a general context, actually reported more sexual pleasure. So it's really context dependent as well. Like the categories are not, it's going to have a different meaning depending on when I use it. And I think the last really important association we found is that the vulgar terms were actually related to more sexual pleasure, higher orgasm frequencies when used in the sexual context. That's important.
Okay.
When used in a general context, we didn't find any association there. But when specifically used in a sexual context, could be something empowering there.
So a recommendation to anyone forming a new relationship, use the most vulgar terms you can for your private parts? Like what would be a good takeaway for the average woman listening?
I think that's a really good question. I think you should have fun with it and use the words that you feel comfortable with. But it seems like if you feel comfortable with, for example, being a little playful with it, being a little vulgar with it in a sexual context, that can actually maybe show positive associations. I think in the general context, I would still recommend people to learn the appropriate anatomical terms, especially also like learning different terms. Like, for example, for men, we have testicles, we have the penis as a word. For women, a lot of people use vagina, but they mean everything. And it's actually not anatomically correct, right? The vagina is actually the inner part of the female genitals, so the canal that actually connects the cervix to the vaginal opening. And the outer part is actually the vulva. So I would still recommend people to learn that. But yeah, based on our studies results, definitely try to avoid childish terms. Also with your children, try to avoid them when you teach your children language. Like don't call it wee-wee or the JJ. Try not to put your own shame on the language you use with the people around you as well.
So the best words for sex education for more young people, just learning it for the first time, perhaps anatomical, so they actually understand these things rather than...
Definitely. And actually, that's not only important for attitudes reform, but also for things like preventing like sexual violence. It's super important that children learn how to call their body parts and specifically call it. And that actually it shows also in track records of like lawsuits and stuff, that the words, like the more specific, the more people will understand what actually happened. So it's also from that perspective, that has nothing to do with our research directly, but like from a preventing violence perspective, super important to teach anatomical terms. Yeah.
I think it's good to sneak in a little education here, and I appreciate you doing it. Tanja Oschatz is a social psychologist and sexuality researcher at Johann Gutenberg University in Mainz, Germany. Tanja, I have enjoyed this chat. It has been fun, educational, and exactly what this show looks for. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Coming up, love across cultures, like intercultural couples. Not every family is accepting of them. People can find themselves isolated, dealing with mom and dad not approving. But a new study shows how much somebody's friends supports them in their intercultural couple can protect them. How your chosen friends perceive you, that can help the most. Details of this study in just a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. When the day is done, we're just getting started. The last show with David Cooper.
Love across cultures, being coupled up with someone from a different background than you. It can cause sometimes turbulence, friction, especially with families. But research shows that support from friends can make things go more smoothly for intercultural couples. I'm here with someone who's worked on that research. She is a social and personality psychology researcher at the University of Toronto. Her name is Hanieh Naeimi. Hanieh, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having me.
What drew you to this area? I feel like it's such a fascinating thing when people of different cultures mix, get married, date, whatever, and the conflicts that arise. I mean, there's television shows about this. What got you interested in this area for research?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Toronto. It's a super diverse area, and Canada is increasingly becoming more multicultural with lots of intercultural couples. And so that's initially how I got into this research. And then for this particular study, what drew me into it was actually a previous study where I was looking at sacrifices that partners make in intercultural relationships. And a lot of people mentioned, having to cut ties with their families or friends because they were not approving of their partner, or they were expressing kind of, racist sentiments and whatnot. And so that drew me to kind of look at whose social approval matters more to people, and the differences between people.
Well, I think that's the crux of it, the turbulence, the having to cut ties with friends or families because they've got views that aren't compatible with you dating someone outside your culture. They can be racist, they can be mean, they can be tough on people. And how to survive it, I think, is where it gets interesting. How does support from one's friends when they're going through all this, dating someone from a different background and having trouble, how does support from friends come into play?
Yeah, well, in this study, we actually kind of pitted all of these different types of social approval against each other. So approval from family, friends, or society broadly, to see which one matters more to people's satisfaction in relationships. And we found that across the board, people found friend approval to be more important for their relationship satisfaction. And so this kind of shows that, friends are the family you choose. And so people really care about what their friends think. But family approval still matter to some people, specifically for Latinx and Middle Eastern participants whose cultural values are kind of more interdependent. They really care about their family's involvement in their relationship decisions. And also family approval really mattered for people who were in early stages of their relationship. So that's specifically when you're seeking external validation from people, and maybe why people are really caring more about their family's approval.
This concept of chosen family, it's a phrase or concept that comes from queer spaces. It's, of course, not exclusive to them. It's the idea that your friends, or the friends that you're extremely close to that feel like family, kind of in some sense are. Is it approval from them? Is it acceptance of them that matters most? I know that's what you just said. I'm asking you to reiterate it. But why?
Yeah, exactly. That's actually where we kind of got the inspiration for this research, because in queer literature there is lots of work that shows that when people feel marginalized in their relationships, when they don't get they don't receive acceptance from their families or society, they go to they kind of form these chosen families made up of their friends, and they really value them and seek support from them. And so again, here we're seeing that because intercultural relationships are another type of marginalized relationship, the same thing is happening here. And so people are seeking community and the approval of their friends.
Is it that power of community amongst your friends that really lets people feel like comfort when they're facing, discrimination from their family, for example?
Yeah, I think friend approval is interesting because we often do go to our friends for support. And so maybe when you don't get that from your friends, it can be especially invalidating, but maybe people can kind of explain away or rationalize their family's disapproval as like them not understanding or being from a different time or something, whereas your friends you really expect to be on your side.
A lot of people face this. It happened to me a little bit with my ex-wife. We came from different backgrounds. My parents are fine now, but 15 years ago they were a little bit more rough. Not to get to talk about my example personally, but people face this stuff. What recommendations do you have when a family is disapproving of an intercultural relationship of yours? Seek support from friends? Are there any pieces of advice?
Yeah, I think it can be really tough when your social network is not approving of your relationship, I think something that's important is to first try to see where they're coming from. Is it just them not having ever been exposed to, people from different cultures? Is it stereotypes? And just trying to understand their perspectives. But also something that this study shows is that different types of approval matter for different types of people. So maybe people from different cultures can value their family's approval differently. So maybe some people can just be like, okay, this is a challenge. I don't really care what my parents think. This is my relationship, whereas others really highly value that. And so just trying to work with them, but also, yes, seeking community within your friends and having a supportive friend group can really help buffer that negative effect.
Without violating too much of the people you've worked with's privacy, while doing your study, while looking into intercultural couples, did any interesting anecdotes come up that surprised you?
Well, this was a quantitative study, so we were mostly just getting people's answers about particular questions. But in my other work, my other qualitative work, people kind of talked about, the different types of their different identities impacting the social approval they receive. So, for example, there was a participant who was queer, and they were talking about how their partner's family, not only they don't even know that their partner is gay, and so they have kind of had to come into terms with not ever having that relationship with their partner's family, but also they wouldn't even approve of them, their cultural background. And so kind of experiencing disapproval at multiple levels, which can be very harmful.
I get that. My grandparents have passed, and they attended my brother's wedding. He married a man, but still, they would always just call my brother's husband and his partner his friend. I kind of get that, like certain families you can never really come out to. I don't know if that was quite the case with my brother, but I see it. What's next in your research? What else would you like to look into when it comes to intercultural relationships?
Yeah, I think this work kind of made me want to learn more about what is it that friends do specifically that can come off as, supportive or not supportive. And yeah, learning more about how people can uplift and kind of support their friends in their relationships.
Well, any initial things? Like, what is it that friends can do? I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah, we haven't started the research yet, but I'm really excited to learn more about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show, Hanieh. I appreciate you coming here. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Hanieh Naeimi is a social and personality psychology researcher at the University of Toronto. That is our show. Thank you so much for tuning into it. Did you know that we are answering your general science questions here on The Last Show? All you have to do is call in, record the question, and we'll answer it. The number is 1-888-505-6644. That's 1-888-505-6644. You might call and ask a science question like this. If humans are about 60% water, why don't we slosh around when we walk? See, no question too stupid. In fact, the stupider the better. Call in, ask a question, 1-888-505-6644. Also, The Last Show is available for you to download as a podcast. Head to www.lastshow.pizza, that's .pizza, not .com, or search David Cooper Last Show in your favorite podcast app. You'll want to subscribe because we've got some bonus content you won't hear on the radio show. You can also just catch up on all the interviews you loved or listen to the show on a night where you missed us. I'm David Cooper, and this was The Last Show.